Morning, guys. I say morning because it's 3:46. I'm kind of an early bird. My 10-hour reset will be over here in a little bit, and so I wanted to start by saying I've been working on the sound quality of my videos. Not really sure what it is. Maybe I just need to change how I'm recording them. I'm using a headset with sound, what's it called? Sound canceling technology, and I still get a hum on my videos. Not really sure if I just need to not use a Bluetooth type device. When I talk to people on the phone using these, it's clear. There's no noise in the background. I've even been asked, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Driving," and they're like, "Oh, it sounds really quiet." Anyway, I've even gone so far as to turn off the fridge in the back of the sleeper because I thought it was picking up maybe electronic interference from that. Everything's off on the truck, and it's quiet in here. The only thing I can personally hear is as vehicles pass down the highway, I could hear a little background noise there, but for some reason the video's still picking it up, and so my apologies. For as much as I try, it just seems to not be all that great. Anyway, so on a couple Facebook groups and on my personal Facebook, I've commented that we're doing these COVID relief loads, and I've gotten questions, including even from my own drivers. Even though I've sent them all screenshots and links and everything else and explained to them on this particular load, if you get stopped, this is what you tell the DOT officer, this is what you show them, you're exempt, and this is why we're doing what we're doing. And so I kind of wanted to go over it a little bit where you can see it from the horse's mouth, if you will. I'm not going to go to the declaration itself and then go through all the different extensions because it's been extended a couple times, and it was modified at one point where they removed some items from the list that are considered direct relief. And so this one kind of has a bit more of an overview, and we'll probably end up bouncing back and forth anyways. But what it boils down to in a nutshell is if you are transporting these items that we'll go over the list in a little bit, and you're a motor carrier that's in good standing with the FMCSA, you can run without these hours counting against your hours of service, or you can exceed the rules. Say, for example, your 11-hour drive time, you can go over the 11 hours. There's no requirement for your half-hour lunch break. You do need to be careful with that because if you're involved in an accident, it does not preclude or exclude the driving while fatigued section of the FMCSA's rules. And so what that basically means is, yes, you went over your hours of service, you went over your 70, for the week, or you didn't take a full 10-hour break, you took 6 or 7 hours and kept going. Those items are legal. However, if you're driving while fatigued, that is not exempted, and it also does not exempt a motor carrier from pressuring a driver to drive while fatigued. In other words, when it's time to stop, you still have to stop and rest. So this is on the FMCSA's website, so we're getting this directly from them. We can click on these links and look at the exact links. And so this is the latest extension. So we can see here, effective the 1st of December, in accordance with the 49 FCR 390.25, the expansion and extension of the Modified Emergency Declaration 2020-002. Now that is what you need to explain to a DOT officer. You are operating under Declaration number 2020-002. And so this is effective as of midnight, December 1st, and shall remain in effect until 11:59, basically midnight, February 28th of 2021, or until revocation, of the presidentially declared COVID-19 national emergency, whichever is sooner. So basically, if the president now says, we're revoking this declaration of emergency, then all bets are off and the rules come back into place. So that is, in a nutshell, the exemption that we're operating under. Okay? And so if we dig deeper into what it entails and what it offers, let me see if I can find the link here, or I may have to back up one. Okay, and so this is the actual declaration itself. It pretty much states, what the declaration is. We'll kind of try and get into the nitty-gritty of how you do it and what makes it work for what we're doing. And so here we are. So 392.2, related to the operation of a commercial vehicle in accordance with state laws and regulations, including compliance of applicable speed limits and traffic restrictions. So basically, just because you're hauling a COVID load does not mean you can speed and violate local traffic laws. So the next one is, related to operation of commercial motor vehicle while driver's ability, alertness is so impaired or to likely become impaired through fatigue. We discussed that. This is not included. You don't have a waiver against being fatigued. Motor carriers should not require or allow drivers to operate a commercial motor vehicle. I skipped the word fatigue, excuse me. So basically, your motor carrier, your boss, or yourself cannot force a driver to operate a commercial motor vehicle while fatigued. The next one is regarding to using a phone or texting. You're not exempt from that. Now here it is, number 5. If you're involved in a crash, there's still going to be an investigation. They're still going to, they're still going to look at whether you were operating safely or not. And you do have now an obligation to enforce or to inform the FMCSA that you were involved in this accident, and you have 24 hours to do so. Nothing in the emergency declaration or this extension shall be construed as an exemption from controlled substance of alcohol and testing requirements. So basically, you still can't put a driver in a truck until you add them to your consortium and do the pre-employment drug screening and that kind of stuff. And so this is the stuff that is not considered waived for you to be able to operate under the exemption. And so I've had some people comment that, we can operate, willy-nilly. That's not the case. We are not running, we're not running like in the 70s, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We still have to comply with all the other safety regulations. The biggest thing is the hours of service can be manipulated in a way that you can get these loads done. And so, for example, if you have a load that requires 13 hours worth of driving to get the load there, they don't want you to at 11, well, maybe saying they don't want you to is the wrong phrase. What they're allowing you to do is, instead of driving 11 hours and then stop for 10, and then 10 hours later start over and drive the other 2 or 3 hours, they're now allowing us to complete the load in a straight shot, and then at the end of that load, you're still required to take your 10-hour break. And if you're going back to a non-essential type load, then you have to comply with whatever rules are still in place. In other words, the exemption ends at that point, and if you're out of your 70, you still have to do your 34-hour reset. If you've done this load, you then have to do a 10-hour reset before you can take on a regular load. Trying to find where it shows. All right, so this is kind of the part where it helps us kind of understand what's the right and the wrong way to do stuff. So our loads that include supplies related to direct assistance under the emergency declaration mixed with unrelated materials covered under the declaration. It says generally yes, however, mixed loads with only a nominal quantity of qualifying emergency relief added to obtain this benefit of emergency are not covered. So what that basically means is, if you have a truckload of TV sets that you're trying to run cross country on this exemption, if you put one box of hand sanitizer in the back, they're not going to look at that as a COVID load. And so the load I had yesterday was a load of medical grade Pedialyte, and it's the same grade. When I picked it up and I looked over the paperwork, what the guy explained to me was it's labeled different, it's marketed different. So what I was hauling was actually going to end up probably in a hospital, and it doesn't have the same labels like you would find on a consumer package to sell at a grocery store. But even if it was on the consumer package, it's still Pedialyte. It's a grocery type commodity, and it would still qualify. And so the next question is a driver required to take a 30-minute break? No, none of the hours of service regulations apply while the driver is engaged with providing direct assistance under the emergency relief exemption. And so, again, the half-hour break, the 10-hour reset for a daily, the 34-hour reset for your 70 hours, those rules are waived while you're on these. The next question is, how do the hours a driver worked under the emergency exemption impact your 60 or 70-hour rule when the driver goes back to normal operations? The answer here is the hours worked providing direct assistance under the emergency relief exemption do not count towards your 60, 70-hour rule. And so in a nutshell, if you've already used 50 hours of your of your 70, let's just say you're doing 70 in 8 days. So if you run a 10-hour load, let's just say, the other beauty here is this. So you're not running over your hours, but if you do a 10-hour load after you've done 50 hours, at the end of that load, you're still at 50 hours. In some cases, this will or can negate you needing to do a 34-hour reset, because now you've gone back to possibly staying under 70 hours for an 8-day period. You only need to do a 34-hour reset if you can't make that 8 days without exceeding 70. In other words, if you only drive 8 hours a day in 8 days, you won't exceed the hours. If you're doing 11 hours a day plus on-duty time, let's just say you're doing 12 a day, then in a week or 5 days, you'll be out of your 70 hours and you have to do a reset. So these hours don't count towards the 70. So the next question, is a 34-hour restart required after providing direct assistance under the emergency declaration? The answer is no. However, upon completion of the direct assistance and prior to returning to normal operation, the driver is required to meet requirements of 395.3 and 395.5, which include, for example, the requirement to take 10 hours off duty and to comply with the on-duty limit of 60-70 hours in 7 or 8 days before returning to driving. That kind of goes to the same thing I just said. So again, if you're running continuous loads, in other words, you're constantly doing these loads, none of this applies. But most of us don't get 100% exempt loads. So like in my case, yesterday I was hauling a COVID load, so those hours don't contribute to my 70-hour work week. I did have to take a 10-hour break before I could continue on my next load, but those hours didn't apply. The yesterday's load didn't apply to my 70. Today's load, I'm hauling totes filled with fertilizer, and so that's not an exempt load. Today I'm running under the regular hours, and these hours have to comply with all the rules. And so I can still hit my 70 unless my next load is another COVID load. Very few drivers are doing 100% COVID loads. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So your next one is the driver required to use a paper log or an ELD? This is the big question. My drivers are asking. Friends of mine on Facebook, have been direct messaging me, hey, how does this work? Do I unplug my ELD? What do I do? And so here it is straight from them. It says, no, the emergency exemption includes relief from all hours of service regulations in Part 49 CFR Part 395, including record-keeping requirements, i.e. records of duty status or RODS, as we all refer to it. So the next question is, if there is an ELD in the truck, what should a driver do to account for the driven miles? The answer is there are 3 options. Use the authorized personal use, otherwise known as personal conveyance, function of the ELD to record the time providing direct assistance under the exemption. Use of this function will result in time being recorded as off-duty and requires an annotation. Basically what this is saying is log off-duty, hit personal conveyance, and then in the notes put in there, what I've been telling my drivers is to put in, the declaration number 2020-02, per FMCSA's frequently asked questions, used personal conveyance, and then I send them a screenshot of this. And if they get stopped, questioned, whatever, they present, the e-log under personal conveyance with the notes, and they have a screenshot of this, and we're going with their first recommendation, which is to use personal conveyance. I personally like this feature better because if you do that thing where they recommend here next, we'll get to that. If you do that thing where you deactivate your ELD, that's what we're using to track the IFTA miles. And so you don't want to lose your tracking of IFTA by disconnecting the onboard tracking that's happening. So you don't want the end of the quarter to come and all of a sudden you've got void data because you didn't track the miles traveled through each state. I haven't seen anywhere where it says IFTA is waived. I have read some states are waiving vehicle registration needs and things like that, but that's a different topic. And so, okay, moving on to the second one. The use of ELD in its normal mode and annotate the ELD record to indicate while they were driving under the emergency relief exemption. So what that's basically saying is note it down normally. The issue I have with that personally is if you do it that way, it's going to show up as a violation. Let's say, for example, you rest 6 hours instead of 10, or you go over your 11-hour driving by 2 hours. It's going to show up as a violation. I've called a couple state troopers' offices or ports of entries, however you want to call them. Most people refer to them as DOT. The port of entry in New Mexico on I-10 coming in on the westbound side, I had a state police officer there tell me that they will write the violation if you're in violation, but to them the waiver means they won't put you out of service. And so to me that kind of sounds like it's still going to hit your safety score. So for me, option number one seems better because it's legal, according to this, to operate under personal conveyance. And so under personal conveyance, they cannot enforce the hours of service, so there's no violation to write. Versus if you go with option number two, your ELD is going to state that there's a violation and they can write it according to him. They just won't put you out of service. So, okay. Option number three, turn off the ELD, in which case the carrier would address the unassigned miles in accordance with the current regulation. So there again, you turn off the ELD, you unplug it or whatever your idea is. You can't record your IFTA miles, and what's going to happen when you hit that state trooper that thinks he can still write you the violation. He's just not going to put you out of service. I still think option number one is best because you're in compliance with all of the other rules pertaining to record keeping. You're just not running the hours per the exemption. Okay, so moving on. What does a driver need to do if taking a backhaul that's not covered by the extension after transporting a exempt load? It says, upon completion of the direct assistance activities prior to returning to normal operations, the driver is required to take 10 consecutive hours off duty before driving. All of the time the driver spends engaged in work-related activities that are not associated with providing direct assistance must be counted under the HOS rules. And so basically what this is saying is when you finish your load, you still need to take a 10-hour break. Now, I'm being conservative and interpreting that like even if I only drove 5 hours under the exemption, you still need to take a 10-hour break. or you put those hours back into your logbook as being regular service hours. So that part's kind of up to you what makes more sense. If you only drove 5 hours and you can move to get another load legally and get loaded, take off, and then stop whenever your logbook requires, that might be the better option for you. Otherwise, if you finish unloading, let's just say at noon from a COVID load, now you got to take 10 hours off. It's going to be 10 o'clock at night, but you got a load to pick up at 3 in the afternoon. So at that point, it would be in your better interest to switch that COVID load over to, your regular logbook hours, because the way I'm interpreting this, even if you haven't exceeded your hours of service for that particular day, this kind of says you have to take a 10-hour break if you use that exemption, period. So that's my interpretation. I could be wrong. If someone has information that says otherwise, shoot it my way. The next question is kind of unique, and I didn't realize this before, but here we go. Are livestock a covered commodity under the terms of the emergency declaration? The answer is yes. Livestock are covered as a precursor to food. The emergency declaration covers an immediate precursor raw materials such as paper, plastic, or alcohol. Now, I don't believe they're talking about alcohol like liquor, guys, that are required to be used for the manufacture of items, including food needed for the emergency restocking of stores. And so what this is kind of saying is, if you're hauling rolls of paper, like the big rolls that, 6 of them fill up a full semi-truck, and you're hauling it to a facility like Procter & Gamble where they're going to make Charmin, that's a direct precursor to the product, and so that can be used under this exemption as well. So is livestock. Livestock on its way to market, to make your hamburger patties or whatever, are also considered a precursor. I wasn't aware of this originally until people started asking questions, and I found this FAQ. That's kind of interesting. It does add a lot of other products to the list of items needed. I hauled empty containers a few weeks ago, and didn't realize that those empty containers were actually for hand sanitizer. Those are a precursor. Could have been exempted, too late now, doesn't make a difference. So the next one is, are haulers of household waste and medical waste covered under the terms of the declaration? The answer is yes. Transportation for removal of both household and medical waste is covered as supplies and equipment necessary for community safety, sanitation, and prevention of community transmission of COVID-19. So basically what that's saying is, the guys that are hauling waste away from hospitals and homes and stuff like that, those are also exempt. What documentation is needed to verify the driver is operating under the exemption? The answer is there's no specific documentation required for verification. Retention of ordinary business records, such as bill of lading, may be useful later for the convenience of the motor carrier and driver to document use of exemption during future inspection and enforcement action. So, in my particular case, we're putting notes on the ELDs, reference the bill of lading number, we reference the load number, and that way if, even 6 days from now, if I get pulled into a scale house, they go back and look at 7 previous days, you have the reference of which bill of lading it was. But the other thing is, should you be audited by DOT for whatever reason, and they come to your office, they're going to see, all of these anomalies where you either unplugged the ELD or the truck moved without, recording who drove it, yada, yada, yada. That's the documentation you need. I have noticed some bill of ladings do use the terms relief right on them. Others don't. They just make it generic. And so in some cases, it may make sense to keep a copy of the packing list that goes with the bill of lading. So I have a couple bill of ladings that just say, 14 pallets and the weight, and they don't say what's in the truck, but they typically give you a packing list. And so it's kind of important to keep that packing list, because on my last load, it said Pedialyte medical grade right on it. And so keeping those two together, just in the event, of an audit or a roadside audit or in-office audit, I think having both will help, keep you safe on that. So the next one is, does the FMCSA have preemptive authority over states that decide or attempt to close highway rest stops? The answer is no. However, the FMCSA is working closely with the states to ensure adequate truck parking and facilities are available. That's kind of a tough call, because when you start to quarantine and isolate people, and you send some people home and say, we don't want you to come out here and work, I do know some facilities, roadside rest stops, have been closed because they're not coming out to service them. And as we all know, there's already a really bad shortage of parking. Anyone that's driven a truck can tell you, if you're driving by night and you drive 600 miles, you'll probably see 50 to 100 trucks parked on off-ramps, parked on the side of the road, parked in, brake inspection areas, because there's no parking in truck stops. I think the general motoring community does not understand how bad and dire our parking situation is. I know drivers that are getting less loads per week because they on purpose, call it a day early. They pull over 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, even though they may have 4 hours left on their clock, because later they know they won't have anywhere to park safely. And so that is a big concern. The feds just don't have authority in that way. Some people think the Fed rules trump all state. That's not exactly the case. But anyways, guys, I hope that kind of explains a little bit how to do, how to use the exemption when you're hauling these loads. Now, keep in mind, they're saying that regular restocking or distribution does not qualify. I'm not really sure how anyone would determine one versus the other. The load I hauled of Pedialyte, it's medical grade, so was that an emergency restocking, or was that a regular, every 3 months we get a truckload for this, facility anyways? I don't know how you determine the two. All I know is my documentation says this is what I'm hauling. To me, it's a supply that's necessary under COVID. Maybe they're talking about like your Walmart stores that are doing their regular routes, and those are not exempted, but your overflow loads are. I'm not really sure how they would enforce that one way or the other with my loads. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and end this. If you guys have questions or, comments, drop them down below, or even on my Facebook page. I'm not the most knowledgeable guy when it comes to this. I do have a buddy that's an ex-DOT from the state of Texas. I tend to bounce questions and ideas off of him, and he kind of helps me out that way. I have an uncle that's also retired California Highway Patrol. He now works as a consultant back to them. When I have questions, I kind of shoot them guys text messages, and even though they're retired or whatever, they're still in contact with their old commanders, and a lot of times they'll call them and find out for me I'm not saying I'm the end-all, be-all knowledge with the ultimate hookup, but that's what I do to keep ourselves out of being placed out of service or in violation. But if you got questions or comments, list them below. I hope this helps. I hope the audio is a little bit better than it's been in the past. Have yourselves a good day, safe travels,